David, this is David Snyder. Thank you for joining me, and I'm super thrilled to ask you a number of questions, a few questions about the world of hypnosis, NLP, and I find you, and just to do a little introduction, David Snyder is one of the most profound teachers I have ever found in the world of hypnosis and NLP, and is really inspirational and really forward-thinking, and also an amazing practitioner. And I really just wanted to ask you a couple things about your view of the world of hypnotherapy, because I do find that it happens to be 10 times more forward-thinking, 10 times, in my view, more advanced than a lot of what's offered. And I really connect to it, and I'm wondering how you view the world of hypnotherapy, how you, even the world of therapy. Like, I believe that this will be the next mainstream. So what's your take on it, and what do you use it to work on?
Well, first of all, let me just say, wow. How do I live up to that? Well, you asked me a bunch of questions, so let's just take them one at a time. So which question would you like me to answer first?
So what's your view on hypnotherapy from your eyes? Not the traditional description or definition, how you apply it.
Well, hypnotherapy as a profession is probably one of the most underutilized modalities out there for personal change. I think we've, all the medical hype aside, and hypnosis is, for quacks or charlatans or whatever. I have not found a modality that has the potential to affect so many things to some degree. In the medical world, we talk about this thing called the placebo effect, which is a phenomenon that happens when we're testing drugs that accounts for the degree of relief that control subjects get based on just their mental expectation, which is the realm of the hypnotist anyway. So I think as a profession, we have tremendous potential to enhance every aspect of a person's healing. It's just finding ways to make it more acceptable, more understandable. Unfortunately, like many disciplines out there, much of what we are taught in hypnosis is old. It's been around and passed down for hundreds of years. A lot of it hasn't been challenged by the members of its own profession. And so we just keep passing on the old wisdom, and we don't really we don't test a lot of the assumptions that we're given. I've always come from the world where you test everything. I've always viewed hypnotherapy through the eyes of a martial artist, which is, let's get on the mat and see if this stuff actually works, right? And are there better ways or easier ways to do things? Because of the experiences I've had, I was introduced very early to this concept of people don't always, they teach you what they know, but they don't always teach you what they do. And so I learned to observe people in a little bit of a different way. And after a while, because of the martial arts background that I've had, which we can go into another time, because of my training in NLP, I started to become more and more, and especially after my training in Oriental medicine, I started to realize that the truth isn't in the specifics of any one thing. It's in the patterns and the process that are underlying it. And that's what's true. And if you understand how to observe pattern, then you can see those patterns in a bunch of different contexts, and it becomes useful that way. And so I just started following the patterns, and I started following the clues and paying attention to the responses I was getting, and I let that guide me. And some of our biggest learnings came when shit didn't work. Shit being a technical term, specialized hypnosis influence techniques. And so as a profession, I think we have a tremendous amount to offer, but also as a profession, I think we have a tremendous amount to learn, because a lot of what we're doing is no innovation. It's just rehashing old principles, rehashing old techniques, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as they continue to work. But I think, to use a metaphor, 20, 30 years ago, when we wanted to make a phone call, we went to the wall, we picked up a phone, we dialed a number. Now our phones go with us everywhere we go. Does that mean the old wall phone doesn't work? No, of course it does. But we've got more effective and more efficient ways of doing things. And I think that's what we as a profession need. We need to embrace change and to experiment.
So just to go a little deeper into that, the fact is that where hypnosis is going, where hypnotherapy is going as it's evolving as a profession, and also as, like we said a bit earlier, that it's really starting to become more in the awareness as other things like mindfulness and meditation and yoga are starting to become mainstream. It is my belief, and maybe yours as well, that hypnosis will be the next mainstream form of treatment, period, as a therapy. So to go a little deeper into what you were saying about patterns of people and how trauma and disease, because we both like to work more in the deeper stuff, and a lot of what hypnosis is known for is the quitting smoking, is the weight loss, is the stress relief, which is beautiful. But why aren't people making the leap that if you can quit smoking in a couple sessions, if you can do these things, why aren't people making the leap to, if it works in this way, it can also work for depression, it can also work for anxiety, it can also work for deeper level disease, etc. So if you can answer that too, why are people maybe not making the leap, and why they should, and how that kind of works, the mental, emotional affecting the physical.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty complex question, and I'll do what I can to be as comprehensive and remember everything you asked me
Getting
about
lots of those
as possible. But first and foremost, I think, first of all, that when people learn something, they learn it in a context. And many times that context anchors what they believe is possible. Now, I spent a good portion of my life trying to find and searching for skills that are cross-contextual, that allow me to, it's kind of like the Swiss Army knife of skill sets. I want skills that I can use in the boardroom, the courtroom, the bedroom, the therapy room, ad infinitum. And most of us don't think that way.
Right.
We like to think we think that way, but we really don't. If we go to learn hypnosis in a therapy class, if we try to use those skills outside of the context in which we learn them, it's very hard for us to access the skills. They tell us that all learning is state dependent. And well, and you're in a certain context, that's a state. That's a frame that you wrap around those skill sets and the identity that you create. And so that's one of the things that makes it hard. Another thing that where people, in terms of smoking and weight loss versus chronic illness and things like that, is that people believe, and I can't say whether this is right or wrong, I just know that depending on what you believe, certain things will be possible for you and certain things won't. People don't make the connection between smoking, which is a behavior, and disease, which they think is a condition. And they think that hypnosis is good for behaviors, but it's not good for conditions. But if you look at the underlying patterns, diseases are behaviors.
Wow. Let's go there.
Diseases are behaviors. They're processes that we're running, just like a behavior is a process that we run. It's a state, it has a certain set of beliefs, it has a certain set of feelings connected to it that can cause us to respond in a certain way. To use an NLP nomenclature, disease is a nominalization. Right? And for those of you who don't know what a nominalization is a noun or a process or a verb that we've turned into a noun. So if you talk about love, well, you can't run down to the store and pick up a pound of love, right? As much as you might want to, right? Because love doesn't exist as a thing. It's a process that we run. You can't run down to the corner store and pick up a pound of diabetes, right? But there's an underlying structure to the process of diabetes. People say, well, you can find a cancer. That's a product of a process, right? And so when we start looking at things like diseases as just slightly different forms of behavior, then we can take the same modalities of NLP and hypnosis and apply it to the disease process. Because diseases are metaphors. Gregory Bateson, one of the earliest thinkers and one of the people that, one of the early sources for NLP work, said everything human beings do is a metaphor, including their biology, right? And so when we take in information, especially in cases of trauma, we activate certain systems that are designed to help us cope with that issue and hold that in abeyance or in storage until such a time as we have the right technology or the right guidance to remove it from the system. But when it doesn't, when we don't go back and revisit those events, we start to accumulate more and more and more of those trauma files, for lack of a better word. And the more energy and they have an energetic component to them, whether you believe in energy or not, they start to build up a mass to them. And if you follow Chinese medicine, what they're telling you is, and the Chinese have always honored this idea that internal pathogens are really just stored emotion. The ACE study back in, I think it was the 70s or 80s, I don't know if you're familiar with the ACE study. There was a study run, there was adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah.
And what they discovered was the vast majority, like 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 of the people suffering from chronic illness, that illness could be traced back to an early adverse childhood experience, molestation, bullying, abuse, something along those lines. And so what happens is when we are exposed to these negative toxic emotions at an early age, we internalize them, and the system has a certain capacity to hold on to these things until such a time as we can go back inside and release them. But because of the society that we live in, we don't go back in. We distract ourselves, or we're taught emotional repression under the guise of emotional management. And so we accumulate more and more similar experiences, and for every unit of energy we keep in our body, emotionally or otherwise, we need an equal or greater amount of energy to keep it there. Until at some point the body reaches its tolerance, usually sometime between 35 and 45 is where you see a lot of these things reaching their limits, and they start to manifest as a physiological illness. If you were looking at a Chinese medical model, it would say that first thing that happens is there's an energy blockage. That energy blockage creates tension. It causes energy to accumulate in that area. Physical substance follows the energy, and before you know it, you have what we call blood stagnation. Blood stagnation accumulates to become a physical, palpable mass, and that's where tumors are formed and various other types of lesions. And so the Chinese medical model is telling us that this is exactly what's happening. And I think when we look at Chinese medicine and we look at hypnotherapy, we can see the patterns that the Orientals were talking about mirrored in the emotional side of what we're doing, because all the internal pathogens in Chinese medicine were emotions.
Right.
And so to me, if we can go in and we can figure out what message, because I believe diseases are messages.
Mm-hmm.
If we could figure out what message the neurology is trying to send us, because in the form of disease, and we help it to resolve that message, like the check engine light on a dashboard, right? When your check engine light goes off, you don't go rushing to the garage to fix the light. You go rushing to the garage to figure out what that light means. Diseases are kind of like the check engine light on the dashboard. Using hypnotherapy, we can unpack what's behind that light, go to the source, resolve it there, and then because there's no longer a need for that symptomology, the symptoms will go away. So when we look at disease isn't something that's wrong with us. It's a message the body's sending that there's something that we need to go in and resolve. Mm-hmm. And I think if we look at things that way, we can start to affect, or at least have the opportunity to affect a lot more disease patterns. Because I don't think of them as, again, I don't think of them as things. I think of them as behaviors that we're doing.
Completely. Awesome. Okay, so a little bit within that, you mentioned going into the childhood, the sources
Mm-hmm.
of where it potentially began, or where the emotional charge exists. So one of my favorite techniques happens to be regression therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can expand a little bit about why that, and you offer amazing techniques of all shapes and sizes,
Mm-hmm.
But why is that technique in particular you find useful to work with this type of issue, like disease, for
Well,
example?
because the biggest thing to remember is that the most important period of our life is from conception to about 5 years old. When we enter this world, we're nothing but the equivalent of a really big hard drive with a few genetic predispositions. And so everything, and we're built for learning. We are never more hardwired for anything else than learning as when we're born. And so we come in with no judgment. Everything that we experience, we take in unfiltered, and it becomes the measuring stick by which everything subsequent to that is measured, and it becomes the normal. So if we come into this world and we go through a normal socialization process where we're held, we're comforted, we're fed on a regular basis, we're spoken to in soothing, uplifting tonalities, we come to associate those feelings connected to that to those behaviors with the concept we call love. And so that creates a barometer or a measuring stick for every subsequent experience that we have. But if we come into this world, and sometimes we're held, sometimes we're ignored, sometimes there's yelling and screaming around us, sometimes it's directed at us, sometimes it's about us, or just that we're in the presence of it, sometimes we're left to fend for ourselves. Ironically, that becomes our definition of love. And we sort for those experiences because that's what was there first, right? And so we can find ourselves drawn towards these toxic relationships. Because formative experiences are exactly that. They're formative. They're like little hooks, little linchpins and little focal points that form the foundation of everything else. When we accumulate an experience, the first thing our neurology does is it sorts through the memories that are already there. And it looks for an analog, something similar that's happened to it in the past. And it links those together. Well, if you link enough of these negative experiences together, it starts to form that energy. And so over time, it builds up to that toxic level that happened in your 20s, 30s, 40s, whenever it is. But if you want to fix something, you've got to go to the source. Now, I call it talking to the boss. I make a joke when I speak to my clients, because I live in Southern California. We have really nice weather in Southern California. And I say, there's only two agencies in the universe that know where this stuff started. That's God and your unconscious mind. Now, here in California, we have a lot of golf courses. God plays a lot of golf. Doesn't always take my calls. But the unconscious mind, she's always home, and when we ask her the right way, she can take us exactly where we need to go, to the source of the problem. She knows what happened, she knows when it happened, she knows who the players were involved. And if we ask her the right way, she can take us there, and we can give back to that younger version of ourselves that went through that stuff the resources they need to be different, to resolve those emotional feelings. And when those feelings are resolved, then the symptomologies that they ultimately generate go away. The problem is that most people's disease patterns are not one thing. They're the accumulation of a bunch of things over time. And so we need to go as far back as we can to the most formative times of our life, because those memories create the foundation of who we are. And so, and all of our psychological and emotional defense mechanisms are based on those early memories. So the further back we go, the more leverage we have over the entire system. So that's why we want to go back as far as we can.
Beautiful. Okay. A couple more things. Something you mentioned today, which I wholeheartedly agree with. When you're working with trauma and you've been violated, let's say, for example, sexual trauma, there's so much out there saying that you have to forgive. Forgiveness is the thing. What I have found also in my work is that until you feel in that situation where you were violated, until there's a sense of empowerment, until there's a sense of the fact that you can even be slightly okay, and not even okay, but the situation, empowered, let's say it like that, forgiveness means nothing.
Exactly.
So it doesn't move anything, it doesn't allow for the healing that most people are saying. Forgiveness is the thing that does all. So I was also really encouraged when I heard that as well from you. So if you can elaborate a bit about that.
The problem with forgiveness is that most people don't know what it is.
Right.
They think forgiveness is well, first of all, it's a concept, but everything human beings do is a concept, so that's really not a good answer. But people rationalize forgiveness. They think that if they just say, if they in their mind decide to forgive somebody, and they cognitively assert that they're doing the right thing. But even though in their heart they still feel hurt and they still feel angry. Human beings are animals first and foremost. Regardless of what you might think, or whether you believe in creationism or whether you believe in Darwinism, ultimately we are animals who learn to think, not thinkers who learn to feel. And one of the things that is a driving force in all of us is that need for justice. And so many times when we talk about forgiving, forgiveness is a feeling. It's the understanding that the people who hurt us, whether through deliberate acts of malice or through default or negligence, they were operating on a program that, based on the situation, circumstances, they literally couldn't do anything different. And that's a good thing to say to somebody in trance. But they're still angry, and they need some way to balance those scales. And so even, very spiritual people like Louise Hay, in her book, Heal Your Body, Heal Your Life, she talks about giving the person in a meditation or a guided trance process an opportunity to metaphorically, or sometimes literally, beat the living snot out of the perpetrator until they're satisfied. And what you'll find out is that when we feel like a person who has injured us has appropriately paid for that transgression, now we can move on to forgiveness. But until that debt has been paid, either literally or metaphorically, it's very, very difficult to move beyond forgiveness. The other way to get it is through understanding. And the way that we achieve that is through an old technique called chair therapy. In chair therapy, we literally split our consciousness into the perpetrator and the victim, and we have them role play until both sides understand how they've affected each other.
Well,
and when that happens, now forgiveness becomes possible. But many times, one of the tweaks that we give is the person in the chair, the perpetrator, can't comprehend what they've done. So we literally make the subject take this person by the hand on a guided tour of their life and show them first person how what they did affected them.
Right.
And when that level of understanding, even within ourselves, happens, even though because we've internalized our perpetrator,
Right.
whether we realize it or not, we've created an avatar inside of us that represents that person. Just like when we were kids, we internalize our mom and our father. They're talking and nagging, and all of a sudden, at some point in our young life, we internalize that voice, and we just do it to ourselves. We're doing that with the perpetrators. Okay, that perpetrator has moved on; they're moving forward to life, but we carry around that little splinter of them inside of us, and that's the exact metaphor that I use. I say, sometimes we move through the world, and we pick up a piece of wood or a piece of plastic or a piece of metal, and a piece of it breaks off and it gets stuck in our thumb or our finger. And as long as we leave that splinter there, even though we may have thrown the wood or the steel or the plastic aside, no matter where we go, no matter what we do, because we still have that splinter, that piece of wood or that piece of metal, that perpetrator still has the power to keep hurting us. And what happens to a splinter that we don't pull out? It festers. It gets sick. But when we learn how to forgive, and sometimes to get to forgiveness, we need the justice part. Sometimes we need the understanding part. But when we reach that point where it's okay to pull out the splinter, now the healing starts.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of forgiveness when it happens. It's the process we use to get there that's often problematic, because most hypnotists and even psychologists are taught there's only one way to get to forgiveness, to rationally forgive that person.
Right.
And it's not a rational process.
Incredible.
It's not rational. We're not rational beings.
Right. Beautiful. And okay, I love it. There was one more question, but I now have two more questions.
Okay.
And
You my big mouth.
I can ask you questions for a long time. So I'll try to keep it laser focused. So even also today, what's becoming a lot more widespread in the healing of trauma is psychedelic drugs or even ayahuasca. And for some reason, that is getting more well-known times a million than the work like hypnosis, where it's completely safe, can be contained, can have its process, rather than these other things that might have an overblown experience. And like you and I have both worked with people that have had those experiences and then have come to us to calm that down. So if you can a little bit tell me about what your feelings are about why that's happening, why people are going towards that direction, and why people are not, why is hypnosis not the number one thing that people are thinking when it comes to the change work?
Well, first of all, let me answer your last question first.
Yeah.
I think the reason that the hypnosis is not receiving the recognition
Yes.
that it needs is because we're not, well, first of all, hypnotists aren't promoting themselves effectively.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
I think that's one of the big things. I think also there's a lot of baggage surrounding the word hypnosis.
Yeah.
And that's something that movies and television, as well as the medical profession in various systems, have worked very hard to discredit, even if they. And that's one of the things you'll find about the medical profession in general. And I'm not anti-medicine. It's just natural in any organization to seek to expand its control over modalities. The dental profession tried it. The psychologist profession tried it. If an organization can't co-opt a modality, it will seek to discredit the modality,
right, and
then rebrand it as its own thing. And that's happened several times. And so those things are happening. Hypnotists, as a rule, are not organized in and of themselves. It's very much the Wild West out there. And so in a lot of ways, as powerful as that modality is, there's just not a lot of organization towards bringing it more mainstream. Drugs are easy.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're easy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to. Ideally, they're supposed to. You take a drug to face your stuff, but a lot of people don't. We talked about this in class. Is that most people in the self-help world, and I don't mean this disparaging, but this is what I observe. Most people in the self-help world aren't really looking to fix their stuff. They're looking to escape from it. And sometimes the way to escape is through chasing a state. And so they take these drugs or they take these hallucinogens to have an experience of spiritual awakening. And often they get more than they bargained for. Sometimes they just have a nice trip. Nobody I've talked to about ayahuasca has said it was fun. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I think these things can work. It's obvious that they're being used more and more with good results. But I think they have their side effects. Like, I've worked with people, and I have admittedly a smaller section of the population, but a lot of the people that I've worked with who've done ayahuasca have said it's been great, and yet they're still in my chair.
Right. That's it.
And when we go to do work, there seems to be extra layers of dissociation that I can only attribute to the use of the substance.
Right.
And every now and then these little nervous twicks, which it's too small a population for me to say. But I think when they're used appropriately by competent, highly, properly trained people, they can be very beneficial. But if we can do similar things without the use of substances that may or may not have a volatile reaction in our neurology, why don't we do that first?
Yes, for sure. Okay, so how do you, in your vision, foresee the future of therapy, the future of medicine, even in an optimal world, or even through what you're seeing things evolve? What would you say you could see could be the future of healing, therapy, the world?
Well,
where do you see it going?
I think what we have now, and that's a huge question. So I hope
I like huge
I'm going to
questions.
piss people off with this one. I know it. I think what you're going to see is a movement. I mean, specialization is going to be important. But I think also what ultimately will happen will be more of an integration. As we move more and more towards functional medicine and away from just very rigid lines, I think you're going to see a lot more integrated healthcare practices with MDs working with acupuncturists or chiropractors or herbalists, Reiki practitioners. I think definitely there needs to be a lot more systematization and structuring if that's going to happen. There probably needs to be a little bit more stricter regulation or training for everything to mesh. But those are administrative issues. But I think what we're gonna see as time goes on is a combination of specialization and integration. You're gonna see teams of people getting together in a collaborative environment for the benefit of the patient. I really think that that's where everybody wants to go. Will it be easy? No. But I think the first thing that has to happen is we have to change. We as hypnotists or acupuncturists or chiropractors or herbalists or Reiki practitioners, I think we have to stop seeing ourselves as alternative healing practitioners. Because when we see ourselves as alternative healing practitioners, it's like us versus them.
Right.
And while maybe big pharma is out there and they have an agenda to make money and push drugs, and no one's denying those things, I don't think, except maybe the drug companies, right? I think the vast majority of medical people out there want to help people just as badly as we as hypnotists do, or acupuncturists do, or any other healer wants to. And so we need to come together as complementary healthcare providers. We need to understand what our specialty is and how we fit into the big picture of healthcare for the clients in whatever capacity we're comfortable doing. Because certainly, you know, to do the work we do, I call it a special kind of stupid. You know, to wade through the traumas and on a daily basis to bring people out of those things is tough work, and it's not something that everybody gravitates to. But for those of us who are called to do that, you know, we can make very powerful changes in people's lives.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Any last words? Anything that you like to leave people with? Top of mind?
Go see your primary healthcare provider. Ask to be hypnotized.
Yes. Amazing. Thank you. You're the best. Thanks so much.